Yeah, actually, let me speak English. I regularly. Oh, how does this work now? Uh, okay, I think that one is visible now. Uh, yes, let me start by apologizing. I'm under a lot of time pressure at the moment. Right out there, my kids are sitting watching a movie after I fed them and or cleared the kitchen, and my wife is coming home in a little while. So I'm a little bit under pressure, and that's why I'm not as well prepared as I like to be. So what you're gonna get is a little bit more like that's real me, not charming at all, not clever at all, fumbling around, not really making sense. Um, so no, I hope it will make sense. Cool. I'll be talking a little bit about the own thing, and I'll sort of go through a couple of the main thoughts in that connected to this whole thing about the own year here in 2023. But I imagine that some of you guys have probably kind of familiarized yourself with it already a little bit, and I have a whole playlist on my channel about this, so I'll not go too much into details with it. And then I'll try to talk a little bit about what I suggest doing about it, which is a little bit of a difficult topic, but I'll try. Cool. Let me just find my here. Well, as we all know, Scandinavians in the Viking Age had these great octennial, so it is believed by contemporary scholarship, festivals where they gathered and sacrificed a lot of people. For instance, in Uppsala in Sweden and in Lejre in Denmark. And there are two different chronicles that talk about these celebrations, well, no, that describe them a little bit more. And the important one is Adam of Bremen, who describes these celebrations in Uppsala, and then also Tidemar of Merseburg, who describes them in Zealand in Lejre. So what I did was that I came up with a suggestion for how to time these, and I'm not going to go into all that. It sounds a little bit more difficult than it actually is. And if you ask me, then in complete total absence of humility, I think what works about my explanation is that it's easy to handle for broad populations, local populations who don't communicate via SMS or Snapchat. And it bases the timing of the own year directly in the lunisolar calendar, which was the kind of calendar that people had in pre-Christian Northern Europe. It anchors it in the anchor point of that calendar, which is the relation between the winter solstice and the new moon. Okay, yeah, and it is believed that these celebrations took place every 8 years, even though the formulation in the chronicles is typically in the ninth year. Ninth. Now, ninth is an ordinal number. So when something is called in the ninth year, then it's a little bit like when we say the great heathen army attacked England in the 9th century, then you have to think an 8 with something after, right? We are now in the 21st century. So anyway, so that's the reason that, and there are other reasons too, that sort of supports this, that in our contemporary way of counting, this is actually every 8 years. Yeah. But of course, when there are scholarly explanations for pretty much whatever, there will always be different ways of trying to understand something like this. And there are also different ways of understanding exactly why, how this is put together. There's a Swedish astronomer who has the in my view the second best explanation. Mine is the best, of course. And he has another explanation, and there are also other people who have different explanations of this. Cool, but that is only part of why we said, okay, let's go with 2023, because this alignment between the new moon and the winter solstice, that actually happens with a greater frequency than just every 8 years. It happens more often. So a part of it is also taking a choice. So what we basically did was we do what people normally do in Western culture when they want to figure out when to celebrate whatever. And that is that we made a pool of eggheads, made a pool of eggmares, and then we make a council and we say, okay, the Hanukkah is supposed to be celebrated on so and so date, or Easter in England is supposed to be celebrated on so and so date, and then that is the rule that people go by. So that's basically what I did. I basically showed my analysis to a lot of people, and then we basically said, okay, yeah, let's go with that one. This is a good bid for an idea of it. Part of the reason that my particular idea makes sense is also that I think it makes some of the story about Aun makes sense actually directly in relation to the sun and the moon cycles. Because what happens when the new moon falls close to the winter solstice is that there is the full darkness of the sun and the fullest darkness of the sun and the fullest darkness of the moon aligns with each other, and then they grow together from there. So from the position of people who are counting their year from the lunisolar perspective, it makes sense that those two cycles align, and then the sun and the moon grows together, right? And I think also that the thoughts about rupture, break on relation versus healing, that actually it talks to it corresponds with this alignment of the sun and the moon. I mean, we all know that the sun and the moon don't align. It isn't always new moon on the 1st of May, and it isn't always full moon on your birthday. So the disalignment with the sun and the moon could almost be seen as perhaps a cosmic image of rupture, of the world falling apart, which the Aun story in a sense represents. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'll just talk a little bit about the Aun story now. There are actually not only the Aun story, there are other stories as well. This particular tradition is known from Denmark and Sweden, and but the myth that we know the best is the Aun myth from Sweden. But there is myths about a similar king from the Danish material, Halvdan the Old, who in different stories had 9 sons that died somehow, and then that time, those 9 sons dying was somehow related to the timing of the great celebrations in life, or something like that. But the Aun myth in which is recorded in the Ynglinga saga is the most complete, or the one that we know is the best. So that is the one that we that it makes sense to talk from. But it's just interesting to see that there's been different stories kind of in the same model in different places in Northern Europe. The story is basically that, well, I mean, you can find the Ynglinga saga and read it yourself also. It's just a small chapter that describes how Aun he's the king of Sweden, and he lives in Uppsala. He has some wars with some different Danish kings that invades. interestingly, these kings are actually related to the parallel figure in Denmark, Halvdan. There's some of those names that correspond, and so he sort of moves out from Uppsala, or is driven away from Uppsala in a period. Then somebody else takes up residence there, and then Aun returns after 20 years or something like that. And the numbers of these time spans in the Ynglinga saga from Snorri do not match exactly those 8, or in the 9th year that is outlined by the sacrificial celebrations. But there are other sources that reference the Aun myth where it is that number. So Andreas Nordberg, who is I think he's a lecturer in Stockholm on pre-Christian Nordic religion, who has written this absolutely marvelous book called Jul och dis ting från kyrklig tid och räkning, and I very much recommend it. Like, scholars tend to blather and say a lot of meaningless stuff, but Nordberg's book is just like so easy to read and lucid and packed with super information. That was my experience. I was like, oh man, I wish I was able to make that kind of scholarship. So that is just recommended. And he makes the case that the story of King Aun seems to reflect calendrical cycles, and these 20 years that he leaves and returns, and these 10 years that he buys to live on by sacrificing his sons one by one, that they represent these time spans between these great festivals. Yeah, and now I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. The story goes, that he comes back to Uppsala late in his life, and then he makes a pact with Odin that he would sacrifice his son one after the other and get well, in the Ynglinga saga it says 10 years, but in the other sources it says 8 or 9 years more to live in, right? So every 8 years he sacrifices a son, and then he lives on like that until the 9th son, where after that the Swedes don't accept it anymore, and I don't remember if they prevent him from doing it or if they kill him. But part of the story is that when Aun grows older and older and older, he is also more and more and more incapacitated, and he can't move anymore, and he ends up, like in the image, just lying in his bed, drinking out of a baby bottle, which is a horn, a medieval horn. Yeah. So what I basically think about this, and I've also spoken a lot about this, is that this is a break on kinship motivated by this sort of consumerist, unending comfort. Basically, Aun is rupturing relatedness in the world in a way that almost mirrors the way that Högtid kills Balder, brothers killing each other. That original break on relatedness in the world, kinship, which makes the whole world come apart in the Ragnarok. Now, the Ragnarok, we know this spectacular myth from the Völuspá, and the interesting thing about the Ragnarok, I think, is that it describes how Jötnar and gods stop relating to each other in all kinds of myriads of ways and playing little games and all that stuff, and start basically behaving towards each other like Christian angels and demons. So they sort of descend into this state of cosmic war, and it is the break on kinship that makes that happen. So Aun, in a sense, represents this fundamental break on the relatedness, the connectivity in the world. And this is also part, or This is what I think. Interestingly, in the story from the chronicle by Tidmer from of Merseburg, who says, I think his formulation is that Danes and Norwegians were meeting in Lejre and doing something to atone for their sins towards spirits of the earth or their gods or something like that. I haven't found the original Latin text because I really want to see exactly what it says. But one of the translations that I found, it says spirits in the earth. They have to atone for their sins towards spirits in the earth. I think it's a very or be forgiven for their sins. Now, I think it's a very interesting, of course, very Christian colored formulation, but it's interesting because that kind of sort of realigning something that has gone awry between us and the world, that is sometimes what happens when humans have these great festivals that recur with a number of years in between. The year of the Jubilee in the Christian faith is a universal remission of sin. In the Jewish year of Yubal is also that kind of thing. Everybody returns to the earth. The Hindu Kumbh Mela is a reconnecting as well. So even though it is formulated in a very Christian sounding language, I don't think I think it actually points towards this sort of healing logic that was probably there. Now, what the Vikings did about that was that they sacrificed a lot of people that to sort of mirror Aun's sacrifices, and this mirroring actually also suggests to me that there is this sort of healing of going on of this this violation of kinship. But of course, that's an absolutely obscene thing to even contemplate today. I mean, guys, we don't throw blondes with bombshell bras and into volcanoes and stuff. I mean, of course, the idea is absolutely grotesque. So we have to somehow figure out then what to do, what does make sense. And I think that the reading of the Aun myth as about connectivity and separation or rupture is a way of refinding or recovering contemporary ritual to make this current. I think Aun can be compared actually with other figures in other or also related culture. In medieval Europe, there was the king of the carnival, who was a king that was kind of presided over the chaos and savagery of the carnival time, but then he was brought to justice at the end of the carnival and judged and perhaps ceremonially killed. So he becomes, in a sense, the vessel for all that break on the normal harmonious functioning of the world, right? The death of Jesus, actually, Jesus dies, and with his death, he takes upon him the sin of all of humanity, right? Now, the concept of sin in our contemporary way of thinking is, of course, we associate that very much with morality, perhaps even some kind of bourgeois kind of downer morality. But the concept of sin in a more original meaning is closer actually to concepts such as impurity or karma. That there's something something negative that we accrue as we live in the world. And I think the story of Aun has a little bit of that note in it, that there is an ongoing rupture. It's almost like, as if the image I have in my head is that it's almost like a formulation or a different formulation of that there are worms gnawing at the roots of the Yggdrasil. If Yggdrasil is that big connectivity in the world, that living cosmic relatedness, then there are worms gnawing at the roots. There are threats to this connectivity, right? Which again is something that you find actually across religions. You find that for instance, connections between human spheres and, for instance, divine spheres are sometimes ruptured or they've been cut over, and humans have to work hard in order to recreate them. In Judaism, for instance, there's the idea of the klipoth or the klipot, which is that the world is shards, it's broken, but some of God is in these shards, these klipots, and the tzaddik, the righteous man, tries in his striving towards God is really healing the world, actually. And I think there's something, similar going on in this. In some of my videos, I don't know if you've to what extent you've seen all my my work about this, but in some of them I actually also compared on to Donald Trump. There's this amazing thing that traditional knowledge, old myths, sometimes mirror very, very precisely stuff that's going on today, basically. Donald Trump, interestingly, is in a sense a carnival king. He is this, like, he has an aspect of being this extreme transgressor. He's grotesque in the way he speaks. He's grotesque in the way he looks. He's grotesque in the way he relates to sexuality. He's like, I can't think of a way he's not grotesque, but and this is very carnivalesque, you would say. And then we are now, in a sense, at a cultural point where it seems that Donald Trump is being judged, actually, completely legitimately, if you ask me. I mean, it was an absolutely atrocious phenomenon, that American president. But it's just interesting to see that culture has now moved into a phase where it almost seems like everything that's bad is being put over on him. Perhaps even, that will start working as a way of legitimizing bad stuff continuing to be there. I don't know. But it's just an example that I think there are own logics that add move in our culture. And I think this idea that the world is falling apart and must cyclically be healed, or that we must cyclically re-invoke connectedness in the world, is at the foundation of those octennial celebrations and their relation to the Aun myth. Cool. So then I got to the big question of what the flippery flying flip to do about that. Like, I mean, because again, that whole idea about throwing bombshell blondes into volcanoes is not on the table. So then what? I had been quite fascinated by this Australian author called Tyson Yunkaporta, an Aboriginal Australian author that I've been recommending all over the place. And he talks about somewhere how rituals can kind of grow out of communal processes where people are linking with each other. And my original idea was that was supposed to happen, and that has to some extent happened. I mean, I spoke to a lot of different people about it. One guy I spoke to was Tyson Yunkaporta himself. Oh, sorry about that. Let me just mute this. Another person I spoke to was Johan Heck from Monomath, and his wife, actually, they had some really good ideas. So had Tyson. When I told, in fact, my dialogue with Tyson was part of realizing actually what what this Aun myth was all about. I mean, I had sort of considered already this idea that Aun looked like the wounded king in some of those Grail legends and so on. But Tyson, he just immediately saw, yeah, man, this is a cautionary tale, and that's what is really the point about it. Because I was thinking, like, why does this absolutely grotesque, atrocious behavior, even from the position of Iron Age people who sacrifice humans, why does that kind of outline this beautiful cosmic cycle of the moon and the sun falling out and falling back into alignment with each other, which is absolutely wonderful, you know? And then it's like a king that is supposed to be a king sacrificing his sons in order to live forever. But I actually think it's rather important that there is this like, things are not supposed to be pretty, you know, and I've really come to think about the Aun myth as a very cosmologically deep and meaningful myth. So I kind of spoke to a lot of people about it and on podcasts and so on, and people have also been doing their own thing with it a lot. There's some people in Holland who were creating some ritual, and they were sending these kind of flame of frith strings that they're sending around the world in order to create a reconnective ritual. So that has worked to some extent. But what I also wanted to do was I would have wanted festivals, and like the Midgardsblot in Norway and the Glastonbury Festival in England, and to make an Aun theme. I thought that would have been cool, but it hasn't really happened yet. I haven't. I tried to convince the Midgardsblot when I was there, just talking about Aun, but not saying directly. And I think you should make an Aun theme in 2023. I think I'm going to write Vicky Katarina and ask her about it. But if she doesn't think it's a good idea, but yeah, so it has sort of been started, but people have also been asking me quite a lot for advice. And what I then did was that I actually went to a guy that, for the purpose of this video, we could call my teacher, who's a little bit of a private figure. I realize this is really mysterious and stuff. That's why I'm doing it. And I basically spoke to him about how to do an Aun ritual. This guy has a ritual group that I'm a part of and have been a part of, and that ritual group was actually based in, or takes the starting point from, that Afro-Brazilian religion, the Orisha religion that I have been studying for many years. But what happened in this group was that, well, basically Nordic gods came and started being like, why can't we be part of the party? So there was a kind of influx of religious experiences with Nordic gods. So it started turning very strongly actually towards Nordic religion. And the good news is that we did find a good ritual. The bad news is that I can't really talk about it directly, because it is a kind of religion where like, rituals is something you don't talk so much about, actually, which is, you know, that's a problem if you want to disseminate a ritual, of course, but it's just the way it is. Like, I've lived in these Orisha temples, for instance, and like, they actively encourage not talking about ritual. If you ask about something, otherwise chatty, flirty, and charming Brazilians will briskly turn their back on you and walk away when you're asking about stuff, or they will give you absolutely nonsensical answers like, why do you put these leaves on the drum before the rituals? That was an example of questions I once asked. And the answer was, because that is a really important ritual. You're like, okay, righty here. It didn't get much cleverer there, no? So anyway, this is just to explain why it's a bit difficult to kind of go into it. But my man here, my man, that dude has the craziest way of understanding mythology that I basically know in the world. When he talks about mythology, I'm telling you, my brain physically starts hurting. Sometimes I have to lie down, stuff like that. When he's talking about mythology, it's like that. Maybe it's just because I'm a super cerebral scholar, and people who are a little bit less dumbed up in scholarship, they would probably be a little bit less, more perceptive to that kind of stuff. But he generally agreed on my analysis on the theme there, but he also added deeper perspectives to it. So yeah, that's a little bit just about my process with this stuff. However, what I can say about it is that the Aun mythology is, I think, it's a very deep animist mythology, which is about connectivity in a very general sense. It's about connectivity in a very general sense. And that means that when we use this Aun, when we, for instance, do ritual under the banner of Aun, you could say, or under the Aun header, then we are bringing that deep connectivity also into our ritual, pretty much any ritual that we're doing, right? So that means that an Aun, it makes sense to work with an Aun with an Aun theme, but for instance, addressing those gods or goddesses, spirits, beings that you're otherwise actually addressing. And in that sense, perhaps the Aun ritual doesn't necessarily have to be a completely new thing. But there are a couple of like perspectives that I think could be suggested. One of them is to think with this alignment, disalignment, and realignment of the sun and the moon. For instance, I realized at some point that in the contemporary runic calendar, then this rune here, which is a combination of the F rune, the Fe rune, and the R rune, that is actually a rune calendar expression of the alignment of the sun and the moon that is the Aun year, because the R rune in the old Swedish rune poem and in the contemporary rune calendar, that represents the new moon in 2023, and the F rune represents the Sunday runes. So it's the sun and the moon's alignment that is, in a sense, condensed in this rune here. And of course, perhaps if some of you are on top of history, you will say, yeah, but that runic calendar didn't exist in the pre-Christian time. And no, it didn't. The runic calendar was something that came in the Middle Ages, and the runic calendar that I'm working with, that or that I have suggested, that the reason I chose that one was that was made very recently in 2012 by an astronomer who's probably the only astronomer in the world who's nerdy enough to actually have made a runic calendar. The thing is, a runic calendar needs to be made for its time. If we just took a medieval runic calendar and slammed it onto our Gregorian dates, then it wouldn't fit. It would just be LARPing. There wouldn't be the runes actually wouldn't represent the moon faces particularly. So in a sense, I think it's very characteristic of how I think with Nordic animism that there has to be. It's not looking into a very distant past. It's very much something about connecting across time, actually. And these two particular runes, I don't know how familiar you are with the meaning of the runes, but these two particular runes are runes that are found actually in runic inscriptions as singular letters, probably meaning carrying singular letters. The F rune is found in the so-called Gumarp stone from southern Sweden, where it says it says Hathu Wolafas wrote 3 letters and then F F F. And we know that it means wealth or perhaps cattle, but in Old Norse more generally wealth. And then later, or not later, the same man actually seems to be commemorated in the Gumarp stone, where it says a lot of extremely weird stuff, but then also it says Hathu Wolafas gave year, ar, or yera, and the year rune is represented with a rune from the old Futhark, right? You know how the old Futhark ar rune or year rune looks. So even though it's written in a slightly younger yeah, anyway, so this is just to say that and it, to my eyes it looks like this man Hathu Wolafas would have invoked wealth with a Fey rune, and then he was praised in the Steintoften stone for having given year good fortune to his community. So these are very positive signs or runes, both in Hathu Wolafas ancient rune stones that are so old that they are before the Viking Age, and in the for instance the Swedish rune poem, which is more than 1,000 years younger than Hathu Wolafas. These are symbols with a very strong meanings of fertility, and thereby you could say positive harmonious connection between humans and the land. So so this Aun rune, that is a symbol that I would suggest using for Aun rituals. That I mean, you can make it, you can do everything with it. I mean, I just put it out there. You know, guys, I have a web shop, and sometimes I make stuff that I sell and stuff like that. But sometimes I design stuff, which is then also like, I kind of put so much work into it that I kind of own that design. For instance, the Raven flag, you know, it was an incredible process to reach as that. But this here is so that specific design, but this here is just something a thought that I've had that I'm just putting out here, and it's so general, and it's so like, it's not something that I can own, you know. That would be very wrong, you know. So use it, you know. Don't hold. I sometimes meet people who are holding me back, they're asking me for permission to use this, that, but definitely just use away at that stuff if it makes sense to you. So that is one particular aspect that I suggest for the Aun, using for the Aun ritual. Another aspect could be the number 99, because 8 lunar years. No. Yeah. I think it would be 8 lunisolar years. 8 lunisolar years. That gives 99 lunations, 99 lunar months. This is part of the reason that We think this 8-year period was probably it. So that number 99 makes sense and it seems that Tidmar's chronicle says that the Danes in Lejre sacrificed not 9 like the Swedes in Uppsala, but 99 people. The Swedes sacrificed, according to Adam of Bremen, 9 of each kind, but the Danes sacrificed, I don't remember if there were other kinds as well, but 99, which is obviously a total massacre, and it sounds a little bit improbable actually in my mind. But the interesting thing is the number 99, which seems to correspond somehow to the number of lunations, lunar months that have passed since the last of these celebrations. So that's something that you can also think with. 99 of something, give 99 things, or light 99 candles, or whatever. Another aspect that I have been speaking about with, and this was actually an idea that emerged originally in my conversation with Johan Hägg, the Swedish rock musician, and his wife, who's a yoga teacher. And I don't remember exactly how the idea emerged, but it kind of came out of my conversation with these people and then with Mathias Norvig after, where the idea somehow emerged about oath-taking, using oath-taking as a meaningful contemporary way of giving something of yourself, right? Oath-taking would have been a Yule ritual in the Viking Age. There would have been oath-taking, which somehow corresponds to New Year's promises today. It's New Year's promises are kind of a late development that looks similar, but this oath-taking, the idea was that could be used in ways that actually counter the Aun logic. That if oath-taking was used in healing ways, imagine that. I had this image in my mind. Imagine that you had the Glastonbury festivals and people would be like swearing off, I will never, take an airplane again, or maybe people who will say stuff, I will never eat meat on Thursdays for the rest of my life, or giving something that would be giving something of yourself in a sense. There would be a sacrificial, and there would be a binding in it, and it would be in a sense a healing binding. Now I'm aware that if, how many are we here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people promised to do something that is a little bit bettering for the environment, and that's not going to stop climate change. But it's not. It is also about invoking that. It's about invoking that healing logic in the world, calling that into the world somehow, and so that's that's another specific aspect that I would encourage. The oath-taking, using the Aun rune, and by the way, thinking with the deities and spirits that you're thinking with normally during your practice as heathens. So yeah, I'm aware that and I have struggled these past months with how the flip should I get to a point where I can talk about this, because first I have to understand how this at a level that makes sense to me, but then I come to the point where I need to sort of bind a thread from rituals that are perhaps not supposed to be blasted out in TikTok, and into a reality which is so deeply ruptured exactly because of TikTok and Snapchat and this Donald Trump reality where everybody are just screaming at each other in ruptured identitarian anger all the time. So yeah, I think that's more or less what I had to say. But